I wrote almost 300,000 words in 2025, and I can't exactly tell you how I did it, but I can break down the numbers and give you a pretty good idea of where I spent my time. Hi everyone, I'm James, an author, editor, and the owner of the Arcanist, an independent publisher dedicated to sharing excellent fantasy fiction. This was probably my most productive year to date. My first book released in December. I graduated from my undergraduate degree, and it was my first full year of running a publishing business. And this year has totally blown away my expectations. I'm so grateful for all of the support and the progress that I've made on my various projects this year. I just recently, and I did an episode about this, started doing what I call a crop rotation, where I'm systematically putting on my calendar periods of 3 weeks where I'm writing different projects. And part of that is that I've been keeping track of those word counts and exactly how much progress I've made. I've even developed a whole spreadsheet system to track exactly the percentage complete that I am on a project because, well, I ran a Kickstarter and out of those 3 books aren't finished yet. So I wanted a very good way to communicate with my audience how close those books are to being done. But I only really started tracking things significantly in October. So I can't exactly give you a month-by-month breakdown of everything that I've done over the year, but I did take a look at all the projects among the short stories and the novels and blog posts and video scripts and broke them down into categories and genre, and then calculated rough estimates of how many words that were spent on them. I also worked on 5 major editing projects this year, so I'd like to take a look at how many words those shaped up to be compared to how much I wrote, because editing and writing are the same work time in your day, and one can overrule the other. All right, let's look at the statistics. So across all my writing projects, anything that's easily quantifiable, so like short stories, books, blog posts, active projects that I worked on, I'm counting here. Now, I'm not counting things like academic papers I wrote for school, nor am I counting like journals or diaries or anything like that. Those things are kind of just personal things I have to do anyway in the case of school. But between my actual creative projects, I wrote over 270,000 words, 271,000 words, just about. That is way more than I thought. I was thinking going into this video, when I started collecting this data, I'm like, yeah, I probably wrote like 100,000 words. Almost 300,000 words. That's wild. There were 6 editing projects. There was the literary fantasy magazine, Winter and Summer. There were the online stories, which was an estimate. Some of those were like 10,000 words long. Some of them were like 2,000 words. Between the 12 or so that we put out, that was about 50,000 words. Valley of Shadow was 25,000 words. The Weight of a Torch was 25,000. Old Sorcery, an Arcanist book coming out next year, 75,000. Between all the editing, that was 265,000 words. So those are pretty neck and neck. I almost, for a second, I was thinking that I had edited more than I had written, and then I realized I added in a couple of short stories at the end that I forgot about. So I actually wrote more than I edited, which is a nice thing because I like writing a lot more than editing. Editing is work. It takes a lot out of me. And it's the same time that you spend editing that you spend writing. So they're in constant competition when you're working with other people's writing. You know, you have to put other people's writing above your own sometimes. And so it looks like I got a pretty good balance there. That is almost a 50-50 split. Now, there were 3 major formats that I wrote in. There were short, which is anything like flash fiction, short fiction, blog posts, anything that wasn't a book's length, I considered short. Then there was books. Books are books, things intended to be books. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. And then there were the videos, which I ran this YouTube channel this whole year. I definitely put a lot more production into the earlier videos than I do now, where they're mostly conversational. Well, that's because I'd rather be writing my fiction than video scripts. And even though the word count isn't really indicative of the amount of time that they took, videos take a lot of time. That's kind of my biggest problem with YouTube. It's my platform. I like being here, and I've had this problem in the past where YouTube's return on my time investment it doesn't tend to be worth it. I have other things that are more important that yield better results than YouTube does, so I kind of often give YouTube the boot a little bit. It should come as no surprise that the biggest format were books. I put out one book this year, Ashen Rider, which was a big chunk of that, but then I also worked on 3 other books that are going to be coming out next year and the year after that. So 3 books that are slated for the next 2 years. That was 207,000 words split between books. The next category, which is they're neck and neck. And so we have videos, which were 32,000 words. This is because every script that I write, I also tend to rewrite it. They always go through intense editorial because I want to speak eloquently. And I'm very verbose as a writer, so I have to condense down those word counts. So I counted the rewrites and the first drafts, just like I do with the fiction. With the last category, very close to videos, was shorts. I wrote some of the best short fiction I ever have this year. The Scarlet Chair, an upcoming story coming in January, Thoughts of the Drowned. I think those are my 2 favorite short stories I've ever written before. I also have 2 others, Path of Ivory, which is about an elephant sorcerer. What more do I have to say about that? It rocks. It got shortlisted for New Edge Sword and Sorcery, but ultimately didn't make the cut, which I think is probably a good thing because I want to put it in an anthology rather than in a magazine. And I also have another story called The Seed of the Gods, which is inspired by Otzi the Iceman and my trip to Mammoth Cave in Kentucky. And that one is another one of my favorites I've ever written. Those 4 stories, I think, just some really solid work, in my opinion. And they were pretty much the second half of the year that I wrote them. But yeah, so Seed of the Gods has been tied up in a submission grind for a very long time. It made it, right now it's in consideration for Savage Realms magazine. They have a 3-step process. In the first 2 steps, it passed. And it's been in that 3rd step, which is approval from the editor-in-chief, for about 6 months. So I'm hoping to hear from them soon. And, I'd also like to put that one in an anthology. And I know if it got accepted into Savage Realms, it would be about a year before that anthology could come out legally. So we'll see what I decide to do with that story. I tend to be pretty greedy. I'm not super interested in submitting. The genre balance also comes at no surprise. The huge leader was fantasy. I mean, I've been working on 4 fantasy books this year. Almost every short fiction I wrote was fantasy. We're at 230,000 words for fantasy. The next category, by a very large margin, second place, was creative nonfiction at 37,000 words. Creative nonfiction would be like the blog posts, the videos, but also just essays that I wrote and sent to magazines or anthologies. I don't tend to do very well in that market. I think my creative nonfiction is really just more for me and maybe not that interesting to people that would be reading it. But, I had some successful YouTube videos this year too. So like there was the video that I wrote about fantasy inspirations in nature writing. And somehow that video just blew up. And that was probably the nerdiest, most, like, this is just a literature class paper video I've ever wrote, and it did really well. So things surprise you all the time. The least I wrote in a genre was literary fiction. Now, I do consider myself both a fantasy and contemporary literary writer, but I haven't written literary in a while, and so maybe that's falling off as I get my foothold as a professional fantasy novelist, because I wrote a lot of literary fiction in college. It was a requirement. I love literary fiction. I really do. It's what inspired my entire pursuit in fantasy, is to write stuff that's character driven and really focused on the human that the story is talking about. But I just didn't feel inspired to write any literary stories this year. Usually when I've done it in school, it's been because I had to and I had a prompt, and limitation breeds creativity. And this year, having graduated my writing degree in May, and now I'm doing my business degree, and that has no creative writing. It's all boring writing. Literary has fallen by the wayside. Pretty much anything of a literary nature that I'm interested in writing is ends up being an essay about something real, or it's in my journal. So yeah, 3,000 words for literary. A little tiny drip of literary, good little chunk of creative nonfiction, and then just a massive swath of fantasy. I've probably written more fantasy this year than I ever have, probably in every year I've been a writer combined. And I think we're going on year 5 or 6 right now. So yeah, that's what I've been up to this year. Those are the almost 300,000 words that I wrote in 2025. I hope you found this interesting. I have a couple more interviews that I'm slowly working on trying to get out of here. And then I have my beginning writing series that I want to get out in January. It'd be really in my best interest to release those once a week next month. But it is currently December 28th. And I don't know how realistic that is. But I hope you found this informative and interesting. And keep writing, keep revising, and just keep writing. I mean, this is what it looks like when you just keep going. Don't care about rejections, just keep working. You got this.